Buenos días a todos, muchas gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy en nuestra sesión académica. Mi nombre es Grecia Turrubiates, pediatra y coordinadora de este espacio de educación médica continua. Antes de dar inicio a nuestra sesión del día de hoy, algunos avisos generales. Recordarles que cualquier pregunta que ustedes tengan acerca del tema que veremos el día de hoy, la pueden realizar a través del chat y al finalizar se la haremos llegar a nuestra ponente. Asimismo, si aún no reciben las invitaciones semanales a nuestra sesión, la pueden solicitar al correo que aparece en pantalla. Y por último, recordarles que para poder enviarles la constancia de asistencia, es necesario que nos apoyen llenando la encuesta de satisfacción que les compartiremos al finalizar la sesión también a través de un link por medio del chat o también pueden acceder a ella con el QR que proyectaremos también en los últimos minutos de la sesión. En nombre de la Escuela de Medicina y Ciencias de la Salud del Tecnológico de Monterrey, les doy la más cordial bienvenida a la sesión académica de pediatría. Y como ya saben, pues bueno, este mes ha sido para tocar temas respecto a los dispositivos digitales e inteligencia artificial en la primera infancia. Este módulo ha sido posible gracias a la organización del Centro de la Primera Infancia y con nosotros el día de hoy está el doctor Manuel Pérez Jiménez, a quien agradezco infinitamente por haber hecho posible este módulo. Y bueno, el día de hoy tenemos con nosotros a la doctora Tiffany Munzer, a quien agradezco igual infinitamente por estar aquí. Y bueno, para presentarla como se merece, le cedo la palabra al doctor Manuel Pérez. Y bienvenidos a todos, muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Muy buenos días a todas y a todos. Gracias, Grecia y todo el equipo de la Escuela de Medicina del Departamento de Pediatría por apoyarnos en esta organización del Centro de Primera Infancia para que la sesión tenga en este mes estas conferencias dedicadas a este tema tan relevante. Hoy, como bien lo menciona Grecia, tenemos a una gran invitada que es Tiffany Grace Munzer. Eh, y voy a leer su semblanza finalmente antes de que empiece a darnos su conferencia. Tiffany es pediatra especialista en desarrollo y comportamiento infantil e investigadora en medios digitales en la Universidad de Michigan. Realizó sus estudios de licenciatura en Washington University en San Luis y obtuvo el grado de doctora en medicina por la Universidad de Arizona College of Medicine. Posteriormente completó su residencia en pediatría y su formación de subespecialidad en pediatría del desarrollo y comportamiento también en la Universidad de Michigan. La investigación de la doctora Munzer surge de las preguntas que con frecuencia plantean las familias en torno a los medios digitales, la crianza y el desarrollo infantil temprano. Y su trabajo incluye la traducción de hallazgos científicos en orientación clínica para las familias. Atiende a niñas y niños con condiciones de desarrollo y neurodiversidad. Además, se desempeña como directora médica del Child and Read en la Universidad de Michigan, una intervención basada en evidencia que proporciona libros gratuitos a niños y niñas pequeñas en todo el estado de Michigan. It's great to have you here, Tiffany. Thank you so much for your time and your willingness to join us this morning in this pediatric conference. I'm sure your participation will be extremely valuable to our pediatric community. And we truly appreciate having you with us. So the floor is yours, Tiffany. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. Thank you so much for the privilege of being here today. I'm really looking forward to chatting with your group about what you've been seeing. I'm just going to share my screen here for the presentation slides and get started. So I'll just be chatting about digital ecosystems, and I've been lucky enough to work on with the American Academy of Pediatrics to develop a policy statement around digital media. But some of you may be much younger than I, and thinking about the time when I was growing up, really the prevailing modality of digital media use was around TV. And there was a discrete start and stop time and just a finite amount of channels to choose from, and it could all be enjoyed together. But now, today's digital ecosystem is really more immersive. It's pervasive, it's commodified. It is designed around engagement and commercialization, and shaped by industry incentives. And so as a result, there are a lot of psychological principles that are embedded in the way that digital media is designed that makes it harder for kids to stop playing. And it creates a lot more absorption and attention capture for young children and parents alike. So now the way that we think about digital media, because it's in our pockets, it's in our faces, and it's in our personal spaces and personal lives, it can be really hard to think about it as a discrete start and stop time in the way that we used to think about digital media as just screen time alone. And yet, a lot of our studies in the digital media landscape are really observational, and they primarily focus on the duration of screen time. And in general, more time has been associated with less optimal language, social emotional development, and cognitive development across the age span. But what we might be missing is that a lot of these studies do not account for other important factors that shape development, things like access to extracurricular activities. They sometimes don't account for supportive parenting or neighborhood safety and neighborhood opportunities to play outside. And so I think we need to think more creatively about how we're measuring digital media so that it matches the actual digital landscape and it matches some of the structural factors that really play a key role in digital media use for families. So I just wanted to take you through this slide here. And this is a slide from the most recent American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement on digital media and kids. And it's not just about how kids are using media anymore. It's about all of these other layers that affect how kids use digital media. And so when these layers here are designed to help shape children's well-being for the better, there can be really positive outcomes, but there's also ways that these systems here are designed that might not align with what children need. And so when we're thinking about digital media, it's important to think about all of these layers, including who the child is, who their caregivers might be, and how supported their caregivers might be, what the digital ecosystem might be and how the design of that digital ecosystem supports kids or maybe creates more challenges for them in their daily living. And then also the systems and structures, things like our government, our schools, and third spaces in childcare and safety for those kids. So it's not enough to think about screen time alone. We have to think about all of these other factors too. And so one of the common questions, if not thinking about screen time, how do I help set, good boundaries for kids and families? Because I think pediatricians are always like, oh my gosh, you have such little time in a clinic visit. And for us, I'm a developmental pediatrician, so I'm lucky to get an hour with families, to talk about any kind of behavioral concerns. But for most pediatricians, that time is only 15 or 30 minutes. And so I really feel for them about how do you use that time most effectively? And I think a lot of pediatricians are like, oh, I wish I could just say 1 hour or 2 hours. But how we think about this is really about what are the key pieces of a child's day, thinking about a weekday where a child might be in school from maybe 8 a.m. until 3 or 4 p.m., that takes up a huge chunk of day. And so working from a child's schedule and then marching backwards to see what time actually is left to use digital media and then coming up with that number as a boundary for the family, and this just kind of helps to highlight what are the most important activities for kids and families to engage in first, and then we can work backwards and figure out where digital play might fall in there. So sleep obviously takes up a huge chunk. We want to make sure there's enough time for reading, movement, time with friends and family, homework and mealtime. And then this digital play can be this like little sliver here, maybe an hour or two on a weekday, maybe a little bit more on a weekend, but setting a boundary that fits in with what that family's life experiences are and their access to opportunities is really important. So I'm just going to take you through all of those key factors, those from our initial model here. We'll talk through kids, caregivers, the digital ecosystem, and then systems and structures. So in terms of child factors, there's new research to suggest that kids don't all have the same impact from digital media, and every child or teen develops their own unique relationships with media based on their personality, their strengths, and then how digital platforms might personalize their feed to that child. One really important child factor is emotion regulation. And emotion regulation is really about how we feel our emotions and then how we're able to manage those emotions. That plays a really big role in children's digital media use, and that has bi-directional associations with emotion regulation in the future. So some kids may just feel their emotions more deeply. And so it's harder for them to be able to control those emotions. It comes out in a lot of different ways. And so sometimes their caregivers might learn as a coping mechanism to give that child a mobile device or a cell phone to help that child feel a little bit more soothed and calm in their body. But use of digital devices for soothing can then displace or replace other opportunities for kids to develop skills in managing their emotions. And so it's really important for these kids, all kids in general, but kids who struggle a little bit more with emotion regulation, it's really important for them to have other tools in their toolkit to be able to draw from when they're feeling those big emotions. And so those might be things like taking deep breaths, going for a walk, reading a book together, or listening to some quiet music. So building up those skills and practice over time, is a lifelong process. And so families sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, it's really hard. Like my kid has really big meltdowns or is sometimes has some aggressive behavior or self-injury when they're feeling these big emotions. And so it takes a little bit of skill building over time and practice. And not every tool is going to work perfect for every child, but giving families some options to use apart from digital media and mobile devices is really important. And then depending on who you are, for many minoritized youth, digital media can foster social connection and well-being. But on the other hand, it can also amplify discrimination, which is associated with worse mental health. So now we're going to talk about like the digital media effects on the child and kind of what the landscape of the literature understands around this and a summary of the literature. Infants under 18 months of age have a hard time learning information from a screen. So they've done studies where they've had videotaped a research examiner hiding a ball behind a curtain. They've done the same procedure where the mom hides the ball behind the curtain in a video, and then they've done the same one where the mom's hiding the ball behind a curtain in real life. And infants in this toddler period, around 18 months of age, they really struggle to find the ball when they see the person hiding it behind a curtain on a video. And so there are a lot of studies that kind of support that when infants watch something from a screen, they have a hard time transferring that ability and generalizing it to the real world because infants are really tactile learners. They learn from touching things and putting things in their mouths. And so they really they benefit from interacting with a rich in-person world. And so, and when they look at a screen, sometimes it doesn't always transfer for them. And so when we're thinking about what's best for especially our youngest infants, having opportunities to engage in the real world and also having opportunities to engage with their caregivers is super important. Among older toddlers, 24 months of age and above, high quality educational content is associated with greater pro-social behaviors and language. There are decades of literature that support that, really high quality educational content has been found to be associated with greater kind of developmental outcomes. And so it's not just about the amount of time, it's about the quality of what kids are viewing too. We found that heavier non-educational and solitary screen media use, so kind of kids watching on their own, has been found to be associated with delays in language, cognition, social, emotional, executive functioning, fine motor development, as well as poorer sleep. And so there are these associations when digital media are used more excessively, it could crowd out other opportunities for kids to engage in some play, reading, or activities that are really important for developing minds. And then more recently, it's been found that kids use tablets for many hours, day or night, and having it at the bedside can be a little bit too easy for kids to access. You know, when they have these nighttime arousals, it can be easy to go to their tablet, or maybe that tablet device is sending them notifications and prompting them to go to the tablet device in the middle of the night. And heavier tablet use is linked with more anger outbursts over time. And so sometimes it can be harder for kids to manage their emotions when they use tablets more heavily. And then finally, it's not just about how kids are, the content kids are viewing, and it's not just about the amount of time kids are spending, it's also about their learning environment and the people around them. And co-viewing and joint media engagement can help children learn from digital media and transfer those skills into the real world. So this is a study that we completed back in 2019, where we invited toddlers and their parents to a lab, and we had them read a regular print book, one of the Mercer Mayer Little Critter books. And then that book series was also available in a tablet that had a lot of bells and whistles. You could tap the tablet book pages and turn it. And then another tablet that didn't have the bells and whistles. It was just page turning capabilities. And what we found was that tablets are just not as high quality as a book for encouraging language development. We video recorded the parents and toddlers engaging over all three conditions, and then compared all of these different language outcomes during that time. And so I'll orient you to this slide here. These were all of the kind of language outcomes that we coded for. And these were the counts that in the 5-minute interval that they occurred. And so dialogic reading is one of the most important and high quality ways of parents to engage, that parents can use to engage their children. And so you can see here, the gray is print book, the yellow is a basic ebook, and the blue is the enhanced ebook. You can see that for the print book was bringing out a lot more dialogic reading compared to these others. And the basic was better than the enhanced even for bringing out some of these dialogic comments that parents make. And so you can see like it's still happening, you know, on this enhanced book, just not to the degree as a print book. Non-dialogic comments were just kind of comments in general about the book, and those were more common in the print book. Parents read the book more in the print and basic ebook because maybe the enhanced ebook was providing a little bit more feedback about kind of touches, and when the kids were touching it, it was providing some audio feedback for them, and so parents didn't need to read as much. Parents made more format-related verbalizations in the enhanced and basic conditions compared to print. Those were things like touch that or swipe that or turn the page. And then there were also a couple more, you know, generally our parents had very few negative comments, you know, around the enhanced and basic book, but a little bit more compared to the print book. And then interestingly, families were more off task for the print book as compared to the tablet ebooks. And so there's, we also found kind of similar results for child verbalizations. And so there's something about the way that digital media are designed that make it harder, you know, for parents to engage in some of these like rich comments, you know. And so I think thinking through like when families are co-viewing, trying to bring out more of these open-ended questions, more chatty comments, you know, to help encourage development can be helpful. But that it's not necessarily the way that media is designed. And then for school-age children, we know that really high quality, well-designed digital media with learning goals, when used in moderation, it can be associated with children's learning of math and reading. Often these digital media are apps that are created that have a lot of thought in them around what are the specific learning goals. And then in the research designs, they're often including a teacher, in as a part of the classroom design. And there's an adult still present that's kind of helping the kids learn from the material. It's not just kids using tablet devices with these apps, if that makes sense. And so there's a caveat that it's still, adult support is still really helpful for learning those concepts. And then in some of the concepts around learning, like things like the physical properties of objects. So when you're thinking about things like fluids or like size concepts, when kids did not have a baseline level of understanding around the physical properties of objects, they had a harder time learning it from a tablet. And so kids really needed to have this like baseline understanding before being able to learn from that tablet device that was summarizing or teaching kids about those physical properties. That and it makes sense because on a tablet you can't touch that thing, you can't touch that object, you can't feel it for how heavy it is. And so I think having the baseline understanding is also really important for use of tablet devices. And again, in school-age children, we see those associations with screen time where excessive digital media use is associated with lower academic achievement, weaker attention and cognition, and then also some physical health risks, including myopia, more sedentary lifestyle. It's possible that it's crowding out opportunities to move your body, and greater exposure maybe to calorically dense foods through advertisements, and elevated cardiometabolic risk. And then digital technologies, again, from a sleep standpoint, this is one of the more strong associations in the literature where digital media can interfere with sleep duration, onset, and quality because of potentially disruption of melatonin secretion, sometimes the arousing content, or devices kept in bedrooms. So a little bit more about some of the content. Kids can learn social emotional skills, especially when the content is pro-social. And often the content design team on PBS Kids, they give a lot of thought into how children learn and move through the world. So for instance, when they're designing things like Sesame Street, they actually draw out on a drawing board their idea for the show. Then they bring their drawing board to kids in a focus group and they tell the story to kids. And then they ask open-ended questions to the kids to see if they're understanding the story. If kids aren't understanding the story, then they actually take the drawing back to the writer's room and they literally go back to the drawing board and they erase it. They like redraw it and then bring it back so that there's this iterative process so that kids can learn and understand the concepts a little bit better. And so there's a lot of underlying thought and effort that goes into, a 25-minute show on PBS. And so there's a lot of funding that's involved in making sure the content is tailored to children's well-being and how they like to learn best. And just as another recent study, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood actually is it's been around for over a decade now. And so they invited the first cohort of kids who watched Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood back to give qualitative feedback about what the show meant to them and how whether or not they use some of the concepts. And the teens that were invited back really reported that they still use some of the social emotional skills that they learned from Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, even 10 years later into teenhood. And so I think the design and content is really important. There are known calming apps that can help promote social emotional skills. And so these help with mindfulness, guided meditation, and sometimes deep breathing exercises. Those are known to help promote social emotional skills. And so from a pediatric perspective, if kids are used to getting a phone, to help them calm down, then maybe using a calming app instead, where it's really developing, it's using the phone, but developing some other skills too, to help make sure their body feels soothed and relaxed, can help promote those social emotional skills. So instead of saying to a family, don't do that, you can say, use this instead, or use these other tools instead, outside of even a calming app. And for families who might be using digital media content that's a little bit less tailored to a child's mind, providing ideas or options for things that they could use instead can be helpful. And unfortunately, when we look at, so this was a study that Dr. Radesky did in conjunction with Common Sense Media, where they watched 1,500 YouTube videos and for kids 0 to 8 years of age. And many of these videos contain violent content. Some of it was violent interpersonal content, where they are trying to bully another person. Some of it was actually like kind of gory content here, where they're playing a video game. These are videos that 0 to 8-year-olds were watching. And then some were included ads that popped up, violent ad content that popped up in the middle of YouTube videos. And so I think these have, there's ways that the algorithm might be showing these videos to kids, and then also these digital advertisements that might not be age appropriate. And so those are things that could be shaped in the digital environment to be more tailored to children's needs. And then in some videos in this sample, in the same sample, 22% of videos in this sample had somebody who was from a Black, Indigenous, or a person of color character, but they were more likely to include interpersonal violence, bad language, or drinking, drugs, and smoking, which could have implications in terms of children's ethnic and racial development, even starting in infancy and the toddler years. So how do we choose high quality content? These are a few ideas on how to find and choose high quality content. The first is, does it help encourage critical thinking and pro-social themes? Is there a theme of kindness and helping others? Do kids have a sense of agency, in whether or not they want to start and stop? Are they having a hard time transitioning away from that content? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's really sticky on their brains. If they're having a hard time, maybe it's not quite the right content. Is it commercialized or filtered or including very violent content? What does the actual content itself look like? And then what is the pace for young kids? They really struggle to learn when the pace is too fast. They need a little bit of time to process and put things together in their brains. And then it should be free of unwanted contact from strangers. That's a really big issue where chat rooms allow for unwanted contact with strangers. And so if kids are experiencing that unwanted contact, then that's something that we should really think about, whether or not that particular format or app makes sense to use. Okay, and then another way to think about digital media use is also is not time-based, that's not time-based, is around whether or not kids are having problems with their media use. For many children, the vast majority, screen media use is not problematic, but it does become problematic when it interferes with a child's level of functioning. And so sometimes for young kids, that might look like increased difficulty transitioning away from media. Sometimes they're really fixated on screen media use, like they ask about it a lot or they talk about it a lot. Or even if you say no, they still come back and circle back to it. They might sneak their digital media use. And problematic use explains more of the variance on children's functioning difficulties than duration of time alone. And the prevalence is about 10 to 20% of children, and that might increase with child age. So who are the kids that might develop more problems with media? Because it's about how a child's brain might be neurologically wired, and it's also about how the design might either fit in with how that child's brain is wired or maybe make it harder for kids who might already be struggling with in-person interactions to actually thrive in the digital world. And so for kids with ADHD especially, they have a little bit of a different reward-based neurobiology where they might gravitate, they need more frequent reinforcements, and it needs to be closer to when that positive thing happened. And so there's certain serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin receptor alleles that are associated with this reward-based neurobiology that then might predict more problematic media use. And there are a lot of meta-analyses that have significant associations between problematic media use and kids with ADHD versus without. And it might be more related to the inattentive symptoms, that kids have a hard time organizing their day or mapping out their day and play. And so when a digital media feed is serving you content that is continuous, it can take the work out of that planfulness, but then also make it harder to learn how to be planful and map out your day. These associations are stronger for teens than for children, but there are these longitudinal associations in both directions. So it's this bidirectional relationship again, where kids might have some underlying challenges, and the digital media and the way that it's designed might amplify those challenges to contribute more to those executive functioning difficulties. And we also see this among kids with autism as well, where many studies continue to use screen media duration for the outcomes. And so kids might experience greater duration of TV, video game, and internet use when kids have more autism symptoms. And greater TV exposure at 12 months of age could be also associated with more autism-like symptoms. And so again, there might be this bidirectional association. Okay, I'm just going to shift a little bit here while we're talking about content and who kids are, and move into a little bit on AI. I know you have Dr. Gerard coming in the next couple weeks to speak to, and so she'll obviously touch more on this topic. But a lot of kids are interacting with AI already. Among 9 to 17-year-olds, almost 9 in 10 are using AI, and about 1 in 4 are doing so on a daily basis. Among our younger cohort of elementary school kids who are 9, about 81% have interacted with AI. But some of the design of AI might not necessarily fit in how children think about the world. And so in this study here, they found that among these frontier LLM models, AI was produced, had more validating comments and more empathy, in a lot of the messages, and also use first person pronouns. And so it kind of harkens back to how we socially like to interact with each other. And so it's designed in a way to really make you feel a certain way, that you feel validated, and the responses are empathetic. And it's talking about itself as a person, which could contribute to parasocial relationships, among our younger kids, especially who thrive when they get that empathy and validation. But a lot of these systems might include some riskier content. This was a study conducted by Roth et al. In 2025, where they examined frontier LLM models, and they had some prompts that they included that were designed by kids, that were designed to sound like kids asking the LLM about certain things in inappropriate categories. Then they had the AI system actually feed the AI system these prompts, and then they measured, how the proportion of responses that were inappropriate for kids. And you can see that among the responses, it ranges from about 12% all the way up to 75% being inappropriate for kids among these like topic areas. So these back and forth conversational exchanges with AI do not yet have the safety guardrails that are necessary for kids. Okay, I'm going to shift gears again and move into caregivers. So one area of research that's been expanded upon in the last decade is how caregivers are using digital media. And these might actually have more impact, on a child's development, even compared with children's use of digital media. And so caregivers share the relational environment that helps to gatekeep digital media. And the digital media for caregivers can act as a connector or a disconnector. So joint media engagement, for instance, is associated with greater teen and child learning, and when caregivers have open communication with their kids about digital media, it's associated with better outcomes for both for the child, better digital media outcomes for the child, and better well-being. But nearly half of all caregivers report substantial stress in their lives, and so that's been associated with greater caregiver mobile device use. And so I think one of the common things that we'll encounter in pediatric clinics is parents and kids having differing opinions about how they're using digital media. And often caregivers will come in and be like, my child is using digital media too much. It's like there's a lot of conflict around negotiation of digital media, and it's hard sometimes for a parent to keep those boundaries. But I just wanted to share these effect estimates based on meta-analyses that have been completed in the past. And you can see here, like, these are standardized betas, and so they're standardized effect estimates on digital media duration and child development has a very small effect size of minus 0.13. The quality has a positive effect size in the opposite direction. Co-viewing has a positive effect estimate, slightly larger, still small effect size actually, but slightly larger than this. But then parent-child relationships have the largest effect size among all of these things. And so sometimes when you're in a clinical encounter and you're witnessing a lot of kind of parent-child conflict, the digital media can be a part of it, but probably the most important underlying issue is really that caregiver-child relationship and conflict, and how can we build that relationship up so and set helpful next steps, for that caregiver and child. Maybe a little bit of therapy could help, promote and bolster that relationship so that there's not so much friction. And then circling back to the digital media, because there's an underlying, this has more strong effect estimates compared to some of these. So triaging accordingly in your clinical space can help. And then this slide is from the American Academy of Pediatrics Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health. I really like this slide because it highlights, some of the parent technoference and how in a laboratory-based condition, when kids, toddlers and parents are playing with each other and toddlers are learning a new word, when parents were sent a text message and it interrupted their learning, kids were less likely to learn that new word compared to when parents were not sent that text message in a laboratory setting. And so our phones are really designed to capture our attention. It's beckoning us, with the notifications and the way that it's designed to have an absorbing content. And so, of course, families are going to use that device. And when parent device use is absorbing their attention, it can make it harder to attend to kids' cues and be responsive to what that child might be asking for. And so when there's greater technoference, there might be less parent-child verbal and nonverbal interactions, less child learning, less thinking about each other, and more difficulties with repair. And as a result, more externalizing behaviors, meaning kids might engage in more hyperactive or impulsive behaviors or aggressive behaviors. And then some of the mechanisms with which this happens is that there can be emotional distancing during times of child distress. Kids might not receive as much reflection or co-regulation, and the device may not be recognized as more than a quick escape by the parent. And media use might not help parents in organizing their feelings. Like it might create a quick discharge, for some of those big emotions that that parent themselves might be feeling, or a quick outlet for that stress, but it doesn't then help you feel like you can deal with that emotion that's behind whatever it is that you're experiencing. So then thinking through the digital design piece, there are so many ways in which digital media are designed that do not support kids, unfortunately. There are a lot of low quality apps with educational claims, manipulative dark design patterns, online feeds and algorithms that contain sexual content that are profiling teens' interests, in unsafe activities, notifications that disrupt school or sleep, privacy settings and recommendations that connect minors with strangers, and then school devices. This is something that I'm curious if you guys have a lot of school devices and one-to-one laptops that might allow access to distracting video games. And then these are some ways to kind of screen out low quality content, and factors associated with the digital environment that might not be designed well for kids. And then finally, there are a lot of systemic factors that are associated with digital media experiences. But this is an area of emerging research investigating what systems and how they might, if those systems are designed to be really supportive for caregivers and children, for instance, providing a lot of in-person entertainment experiences or adequate childcare, then families might not need to resort to digital media use to fill those gaps. So sometimes the digital media use is really functional and it's serving a purpose in that family's life. And when these systems do not support families, then they're going to turn to something that's very easy to access, that's frictionless to be able to solve their problems in that space. And we know from the literature, these are a few associations that are hypothesized to be associated with greater digital media use, lack of third spaces, families experiencing poverty and long work hours. So tying it all together, just thinking about what's the big picture takeaway? Really think about supporting relationships, which can make a tremendous impact on development. Facilitate open communication around digital media between caregivers and children as a part of that supporting relationship. And then really thinking through what are some high quality digital media ideas, as long as the important building blocks of childhood are there. Those include sleep, play, movement, reading, and connection with family. And then thinking about promoting emotion regulation techniques in non-digital ways and using digital media to connect with each other as a family. And I just wanted to share a few resources before the question and answer session. This is the American Academy of Pediatrics has a family media plan that you can talk through as a family and print out and go through and write your name in here and move through there's ways to setting digital media boundaries and building digital literacy. And then it's nice because it's not just telling a child, you have to do this. It's about setting rules for the whole family so that there's a culture of communication and that families and parents are adhering to the same rules and boundaries as kids are. And it's not just about the kids' use. Then the Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health is an incredible resource. There are two medical directors who are amazing and have moved this work forward. And the director of the Center of Excellence is really incredible, and they've developed so many resources for families. There's a question and answer portal, a framework for thinking about and talking to parents about and kids about screens using the 5 C's. And there's guides for clinicians and parents for each of these age groups. They're conversation starters for teens to talk about together. Building healthy relationships with media and activities and printable activity cards. A glossary of digital media platforms to set up your devices so that it's protecting kids online. But, setting up your devices is just one step. Parent-child communication is really important still. And so it provides ideas on how to set up your device so that it protects kids online. And some tools to help families develop healthy media use and some guidance for problematic media. This is the 5 C's of Media Use Resource Hub that has posters available, a research corner that helps highlight new research, and some talking points for media use based on parent and child concerns, a calm toolbox that you can draw from to help kids cope with stress, and then some social media case scenarios as well. Okay, and that's it. I'd love to share, stop for some questions, but thank you so much for your attention and for the chance to share about this.
Tiffany, thank you very much for your excellent presentation and also for giving us some resources, very useful resources for our practice, for consult and for working with the families and to care better our children. I'm going to ask you some questions that I have here from the audience. First, after hearing all these, can we say that control and intentional use of electronic media can be productive for active learning?
Yes, I think so. It kind of depends on how that's designed, but really high quality media, when it's designed well, can be helpful space for learning. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the media that families are encountering in our commercial devices in general are not necessarily designed in a way to promote that learning. And so really choosing high quality media, relying on things like PBS Kids and Common Sense Media as a partner to find helpful resources for families can be really helpful.
Great, great. We have many questions. I'm going to try to put them together, some of them in some topics, because many of our pediatricians and residents are asking, do you have any recommendations for working with families in which the parents themselves are addicted to screens?
Oh, yeah, that can be really hard. Um, I think number one, it can be a sensitive topic. And so, digital media is everywhere. It's designed where we have to use it to get through the modern world. And yet, the very product that we need to use is also exploiting us by collecting our privacy data and selling it to people, and designed in a system that is meant to extract your attention. And so there's a lot of these design features that I think we can join with families and just say, yeah, it is really hard. It's designed like the ways that we're using media, it's designed to produce that outcome for many of us, And
Mm-hmm.
so just putting it out there that it's not their fault, that it's designed to be a certain way. And then marching through like, gosh, like what you do has so much relevance and importance, for your child. Your child's best role model and best teacher. How are you using digital media? And, we are all on our phones a lot. We have to use it to connect. Are there ways that you're using media that you might like to talk about changing? If not, that's okay. But if yes, like let's open this door to conversation, knowing that we all need to use it. We just want to figure out ways to use it where it's going to be helpful for you and your family, and think through some of the design features and how we can avoid some of those design features that can be trickier. So really having like an open conversation about it. And some families might not be ready, so kind of assessing their level of readiness for change through motivational interviewing techniques can help. And providing, like as your, sorry, my light keeps going out, as your pediatrician, I care so deeply, about your child, and I also care so deeply about you, and I want to make sure you have all the resources you need, for your success. And so if I can provide any kind of therapy recommendations for you, make sure you have access to the things that you need, because sometimes for the parent, there's an underlying mental health concern or an underlying other issue, that's contributing to that problematic media use, that needs to be more um, it might be under-addressed, as it currently stands. So I think those are a few things that you could consider doing. Obviously, your time is so limited, it's like you don't have enough time with your patients, but kind of drawing from those tools can help.
Thank you. Thank you. Here's a very specific question. Could you recommend other high quality, developmentally appropriate content in addition to Daniel's Tiger's Neighborhood or Sesame Street, or where parents can find reliable recommendations of this content?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are Common Sense Media is an organization that their job is actually to rate the content. Some of it is under a paywall right now, but some of it is available to families. And so they have a rating system that rates like, um, pro-social content. Is there any violence? Is there any kind of language concerns or sexual content in this? And then they also have a nice resource where it's like, oh, if your child really likes this video game that has a lot of violent content, think about this video game instead, which has these other aligned features that could kind of scratch that itch without having as much of that violent content. Um, so that's one resource. Another resource is the American Academy of Pediatrics Center of Excellence for Social Media and Youth Mental Health. They have this red light, yellow light, and green light on content. Green light content is stuff on PBS Kids. Things like Miss Rachel are really great for kind of young learners too. Um, Bluey is also another really great option for young learners. Blue's Clues. So things that have a little bit more like underlying investment in them or from people that really understand child development who have like created this content. Um, Yellow light content are things like video games, or YouTube Kids that might have just a little bit too, the access is really open, and we don't know, the algorithm's a little bit of a black box. We don't know what's going to get shown to that child, in terms of the feed. And then red light content is things that kids really shouldn't be using, things like AI companions, like using AI as a friend. So those are a few like ideas of things that or extra resources to kind of get families started on positive, high quality content.
Thank you. Wonderful recommendations. I'm going to ask you a very basic question because this question has been repeated in this month with all our invite conference people. And at what age do you recommend introducing children to screen exposure? I'm going to link it with your recommendation. Many of us in the pediatric practice here in Mexico and Latin America use the anticipatory guidance for the AAP. When do you recommend to start talking about all these AI technology screens with families during the healthy child visits?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm hearing two different questions.
Yeah.
Number one, when can we recommend starting use of digital media for a family? Number two, when do we start talking about it in our clinic visits?
Yes.
So I'll address number one first. I think that answer can vary depending on who that family is. And so I think as a clinician, you have so much insight and knowledge about what that family might be going through and can triage accordingly in your clinic visits. Like maybe this family is experiencing housing instability. And I can't talk about digital media, right now in this like infant stage, but they're using a lot of digital media. Maybe I need to address the housing insecurity or like, maybe I need to address X, Y, and Z. And when families can start, is also kind of, I think the infancy years are so important to so many developmental outcomes that you're really laying the foundations for healthy habits across the lifespan. And so infants, because they have struggled to learn information from a screen, they really need opportunities to spend with their caregivers, interacting with their caregivers. They need that time to learn language, and explore the world with their hands and putting things in their mouths. And so highlighting for infants, especially, these are things that you can be doing to really set the foundation. And, sometimes a little bit of screen can be okay, but it's unfortunately not something that infants necessarily really learn from. And then thinking about, in the toddler and preschool years, I think some high quality media can be appropriate to start around then, but families shouldn't feel pressured to start,
Yeah.
screen use. So it's not necessarily a question of when should I start screen media, but it's a question of how can, when you do start it, what are some ways to kind of help make sure those kids get the best experiences from the digital media use and what is kind of the evidence base? Um, and then, yeah, I think it's important to address screen media use, in the clinical encounters as early as those infant years, that because parents, when they're feeding their infants, they might be on their devices, and it's really important for families to get that downtime, but then explaining like, oh, like the way that you're using media now really is will have implications, for how they might understand or make meaning from media. And so what we know early on, as early as 9 months of age, infants love their caregivers. When even what their caregiver is touching, infants are more likely to look at the objects that their caregiver is touching compared to things that they're not touching. And so if that thing that they're touching is a phone, that infant's going to be more curious about it. And it's going to create a little bit of a meaning, like kind of, it's going to infuse meaning into that object in a way that um, if caregivers are touching like a book or something else, it just like
Yeah.
creates a little bit more meaning, for that child. And so talking about it early and often so that it's a part of your clinic visit and focusing on like how might caregivers be interacting from a developmental standpoint and how is their media use, if you feel comfortable talking about it with the caregiver.
So thank you again, Tiffany. We truly appreciate the time, expertise, resources, and the passion you share with us. I know that your insights will certainly contribute to our work with children's families and the pediatric community, and specifically for early childhood. So thank you very much again. And I pass the voice to Grecia to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you, Dr. Tiffany. Nothing to add to what Dr. Manuel already said. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge. So, gracias a todos por haber estado aquí con nosotros. Recuerden que van a poder encontrar estas sesiones en nuestro canal de YouTube en los próximos días. Las primeras dos ya están en el canal. La del día de hoy se encontrará en el canal los próximos días y nos vemos el próximo miércoles con nuestra última sesión de este bloque y tendremos con nosotros a la doctora Lauren Giroud con el tema de evidencia sobre el uso de pantallas en el desarrollo. Gracias a todos. Thank you, Dr. Tiffany. Gracias, Dr. Manuel. Nos vemos el próximo miércoles.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye bye.